Hi, I'm Caden Zimmerman, and today I'm going to be reading from Acts chapter 23. So this chapter starts out with a bunch of people yelling, and then the leader of the Sanhedrin telling everybody to smack Paul in the mouth. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense without context, because it's really part of a larger story that starts around chapter 21. Long story short, Paul goes to Jerusalem, tells everybody the gospel, and brings some Greeks into the temple. Well, it makes some Jews really mad, so they take him to the leaders of the law, the Sanhedrin, and then Paul is explaining himself. That's where this chapter picks up. Feel free to read along with your own Bibles. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him in the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck." Those who were standing near Paul said, "How dare you insult God's high priest?" Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe all these things. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. "We find nothing wrong with this man," they said. "What if a spirit or an angel had spoken to him?" The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, you must also testify in Rome." So I'm just going to stop things right here and talk about what's going on. So really, Paul just says, "Oh, the Holy Spirit told me to go and tell everybody about Jesus and take Greeks into the temple." And well, this causes a theological argument within the accusers of Paul. So one side is the Pharisees and one side is the Sadducees. The Pharisees believe in spirits, but the Sadducees don't. So the Pharisees are like, "Well, we can't accuse this guy if a spirit told him. How do we know a spirit didn't tell him?" And the Sadducees are like, "No such thing." And the argument gets so heated that the guards have to take Paul into the barracks so he doesn't get torn apart. But the story doesn't end there, because while Paul is in the barracks, not getting torn apart, God comes and stands next to him and basically says, "Good job, Paul. And not only are you going to do this in Jerusalem, but all over the place." So I think the lesson you can really learn from this story, and also the rest of the stories in the chapter, is that God takes care of his children. Let's keep reading. The next morning, some of the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside and said, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "Some Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man with this warning, "Don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me." Then he called 2 of his centurions and ordered them, "Get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. Go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide horses for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix." He wrote a letter as follows. Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him. But I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris. The next day, they let the cavalry go on with him, while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letters to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear your case when your accusers get here." Then he ordered Paul to be kept under guard in Herod's palace. So this is such a cool story. It follows directly after the other story in this chapter because Paul is still in the barracks. Meanwhile, a bunch of these angry Jews get together and they're like, "Hey, we gotta get rid of this Paul guy. He keeps telling people about Jesus." So they come up with this conspiracy and they take this oath that they're not gonna eat or drink until they kill Paul. So they plan this ambush with like 40 guys where they're gonna try and kill him on the way to his trial. Well, Paul's nephew catches wind of this and tells Paul, who tells one of the centurions. And the centurion's like, "Hey, that's not cool." So he sends a letter to the governor. And he tells the governor about Paul. And he says, well, this guy isn't really breaking Roman law. He's breaking Jewish law. And it seems kind of more like a theological problem, so he shouldn't go to jail and he definitely shouldn't get killed. I'll send him to you for a more fair trial. So then he gets all these soldiers and cavalry and spearmen, and they escort Paul to Caesarea, to safety, where he can get a better trial. As much as they were wrong, I kind of feel bad for those Jewish guys who took the oath. I mean, they couldn't kill Paul, and everybody has to eat. So breakfast the next morning must have been kind of weird. I think it was probably just awkward for everybody. Which is a good lesson you can get from this. Don't make oaths you can't keep. But even better, we can learn that God takes care of His children. And He's always in control, even if we don't see it. Because you see, when Paul was taken to the Sanhedrin, he didn't know about the centurion and the letter and the governor and all of this. He probably didn't see why God was doing this. But it was all a plan by God to spread the gospel to Rome. And so, this just goes to show that even if we don't see it, God has a plan behind everything. And that's such an encouragement to Christians right now. I mean, with all this mess, we don't know what's going on. We don't see what God is doing. But He's working everything for good. He's working everything for His plan. And that's such an encouragement for us as Christians. Thanks for watching.